Hi, my name is Anish Desikan. In the last lesson, we learned how to import sprites, create objects, add some basic events and behaviors, and also create a game where we have a single screen, non-scrolling room that we can actually run and play. So this is actually the result of what we built in the last lesson, which is that we have a player who can shoot a bunch of bullets and can move around on the screen. So in this lesson, we're actually going to learn about how to deal with scrolling so that when the player goes off the screen, the camera actually scrolls with it so you can see more of the world. And we're going to learn about collisions and other helpful events. And so to do that, we're actually going to make enemies, and we're going to have the ability to shoot and destroy the enemies. So to begin, we're going to make a little sprite of an enemy, and once again I'm going to create a sprite, and I'm not going to take too much time creating the image of the sprite, but I will do my best. So this is going to be some sort of sticky note monster, I guess. So it looks like this, and I'm going to fill it in red, and I guess a more menacing red, and then we're going to give it some eyes that are intimidating and a scary mouth. And so this is our enemy, and what we're going to do is that is the sprite. We're going to name it over here by right clicking and clicking rename, and we're going to call it SPR_enemy. Now we're going to actually create an object for this enemy, and so we're going to create object, and we're going to call it OBJ_enemy, and we see it here in the workspace. We're going to add a sprite of the enemy to it, and now we can actually go back to our room, and we can place these enemy objects in the scene. So I'm just going to put a few around, and these are going to be our enemies. So now that we have these enemies, we're going to define all the behaviors surrounding collisions with these enemies. So right now, let's play the game and see what happens. We have our player object in the center, and we can control him. And what happens is we can just kind of go through these enemies, and all the bullets just kind of go through these enemies as well. So what we want to happen is, first, when the bullet touches the enemy, we want the enemy to die and the bullet to die. So let's start by doing that. And the way we do that is, let's go to our bullet object. So double click the bullet object, and it'll bring us to our workspace area with the bullet object. And we're going to have an event that actually is a collision. So we have a collision here, and when it collides with the enemy object, we're going to have some logic to what happens when it collides with the enemy object. So we can actually move this by middle clicking and dragging, or if you don't have a mouse, you can hold Alt and move the mouse. And so that's what pans this workspace. You can also zoom in and out with the holding Control and moving the mouse up and down. Or if you have a trackpad, you're able to just pinch. So we are going to now find the right logic to make both the bullet and the enemy disappear when the bullet hits the enemy. So what we're going to do is we're going to search for destroy, and we have this thing called destroy instance. So we're going to destroy the instance, and what it'll do is it'll actually destroy itself. So right now we have it on self. So if you click this little down arrow, it's set to destroy itself. So that's good, because self means, in this case, it's the object bullet. So it's going to destroy itself when it collides with the object enemy. But we also need to destroy the enemy. So we're going to drag another destroy instance, and we're going to choose other. So what happens now is when the bullet touches an enemy or collides with an enemy, it's going to destroy itself and the other thing, which is the enemy. So now that we have this logic, let's try and play it and see what happens. So what I'm going to do is try to defeat this enemy here. And so I shoot a bullet out, and when they touch each other, the bullet and the enemy both disappear. So that's pretty cool. We have pretty much a working game here at this point. And we can shoot at each one of these, and we can kind of just kill all of them. And so that's pretty cool. Let's continue on. So the next thing we need to do is make the player able to die. And so when a player touches an enemy, the player should die. So let's go over to our player object, and let's add an event to the player object where the collision happens with an enemy. And then when we collide with an enemy, what we'll do is we will restart the game. So restart, and there's an option for restarting the game. And so now let's test out again. And now I can move around, I can shoot, and if I run into an enemy, the game restarts. However, you'll notice that it doesn't really look like I'm touching the enemy completely when it restarts. So the reason for that is the collisions on these objects are defined by boxes that we can make ourselves. So if you look carefully, I'm not quite touching this enemy and I'm still dying. So we need to fix this. So what we can do is we can go over to our sprite for our player and click on the collision mask. And what you can see is this is the box that defines the collision. If this box touches the enemy's box, then the player dies. But you can see that this is outside of what the player's range is. So what we need to do is actually change the size of this collision mask. The way we do that is we set the mode to manual, and then we can modify the box that it requires for it to hit it. And I personally really like the idea that we can set the box to be really small. That way players feel like they have more of a chance to survive. You can also choose the type to be any of these other shapes, for example, ellipse, and you can make it fit the shape perfectly. However, this will be, as you can see, it's slow, which means that the game will run a bit slower because of it. So we want to just stick with rectangles for now, and I'm going to make it small enough so that players feel like they can have the freedom to move around. And so that's good, and we can play the game and see what happens. Alright, so now you can see if I get really close, I can sort of overlap the enemy, but in my head that's okay because the player should feel like they're actually getting hit by the enemy and not just dying by not even touching the enemy. So I prefer this over the other solution. And you can refine that to whatever you like, the bounding boxes. So let's go back, and the next step that we need to do is actually deal with on-screen and off-screen objects. So right now everything is limited to a single screen. We want to be able to move around beyond just the screen. So we go over to our room view, which you can do by double-clicking the room or clicking on a tab if it's already open. And what we want to do is make there be more objects outside of this area. So first what I'll do is zoom out, and I can see more. And now if you look over to your left, you'll be able to see these things, these options here, and what you need to find is this properties for room 0. So properties for room 0 are here, and you'll see that the size of the game is set here with width and height in pixels. And what we need to do is actually make it larger than that. So what I will do here is make this 2048 by 2048. And so the room just grew in size, as you can see. However, if we play the game right now, we'll run into an issue because it'll actually run the game as if that whole space is in view. As you can see, the whole space is in view right now, and that's not what we want. We still want that same area to be in view, but the player is able to move around beyond the area. So the way we do that is under the properties of the room, we go to viewports and cameras, and we enable viewports. And under viewport 0, what we do is we set the width and height to be whatever you want the game to show up as. We make the visible box checked. That way you'll see how much is actually being viewed. And then what we want to do is set if you go scroll down, you'll see object following, which is a cool feature that'll let you automatically follow the player character within bounds. So what we can do is follow an object, and we're going to follow object player. This border is actually what determines how close you need to get to the edge before the camera starts to move. So 32 is kind of low, so I'm going to actually set 128 as the value. And horizontal speed and vertical speed, we're going to leave them at -1. They basically, at -1, will strictly follow the player as opposed to moving the camera gradually. So we're going to run the game, and I'm going to test out the moving off screen. So I'm going to move over to the right here, and then once I'm within 128 pixels of the edge, the screen starts to move. So now we actually have scrolling, where the character can reach an edge and continue scrolling. That's pretty cool. So now all I'm going to do is populate this space with some more enemies, and after that, we will continue to the next lesson. Alright, with the space all populated, the next lesson will teach you how to do timing related events, such as making sure the bullets only happen at a certain rate, making sure that enemies can move around in a path, and that we have a score counter in the game so that it actually feels like there's an accomplishment. I'll see you there.